to the program. Let's see. President Trump has been moving a whole lot of things since he got into office. It's just about a week. It's up to a week. He was in office 20th. That's a Monday.
Yes.
It's less than a week. But so many things have changed. Conversations around the world has changed. At the World Economic Forum, there's talks about tariffs, the threat to GDP, global GDP, and all of that. Those talks are back because of his pronouncement. Now we're looking at the oil and gas sector, where I think yesterday he did say telling OPEC to lower crude prices, but we know that everybody's protecting their own. OPEC countries want prices to go up because that's their major source of revenue. Saudi Arabia was on one of the sessions this afternoon, and I wonder how all of this will go from your views.
Well, thank you so much for having me, as always. It's interesting because it comes at a time when Nigeria is transiting from importing petrol to the domestic refiner supplying the markets and stabilizing the midstream sector and developing frameworks for stability and you can see that last December, was the first time when you didn't have disruptions in supply. And right now, because the market is deregulated according to sections 205 and 206 of the PIA, the price of petrol is so sensitive to the price of crude oil on the international markets. Any $3, $4, $5 hike or reduction affects the price of petrol on the local scene. But then, President Trump, intends to add 30 million barrels of crude oil. He started giving out licenses to companies. Him bringing in 30 million barrels to the market and possibly negotiating a truce between Russia and Ukraine and lifting that embargo on Russia coming back to the official market is definitely going to send prices to anywhere around $62 or $65 a barrel, which might lead to lower petrol prices in Nigeria. But then again, the question becomes, for Dangote, for example, how do you have a situation where you're a major crude oil producing country, a member of OPEC, and Dangote, for example, is having to import crude oil as it ramps up to full capacity utilization? Next month we expect that it's going to hit full capacity utilization.
Which is the 650,000
barrels per day. And it's going to be producing about 52 million liters of PMS on a daily basis, which is way more than Nigeria needs on a daily basis.
Yeah, he's already started exporting.
He's already started exporting, but he's going to have to start importing. He's already started importing. He's importing. He's going to have to raise the amount of crude oil feedstock he imports into Nigeria. He's going to have to import anywhere between 10 and 12 or 13 million barrels of crude oil. It doesn't make any sense because you have a framework in the Petroleum Industry Act that says that operators are supposed to allocate a share of their output to the domestic market before they commit or pledge to the international markets. Because, you have 130 million barrels.
I was told that the reason for the imports might just be economical, because when we look at the price of crude, WTI is cheaper than Brent, and a mix of it is not bad, doesn't reduce the quality, but can help when you look at it economically. Well,
WTI is in terms of the weights of WTI has a lower API degree below 26 degrees centigrade, and WTI gives you more non-transportation fuels than it gives you transportation fuels. And when you refine WTI, the petroleum gases that are recovered actually has more butane than propane, and we use more butane in Nigeria than propane, because Nigerian crude, which is light grade, has more propane than butane. And refiners globally always have a blend of crude oil feedstock that they refine to achieve a balanced crack spread and a positive cracking margin. But then again, you have to also realize that Nigeria's sweet crude, Nigeria has 34 blends of crude oil. Nigeria's sweet crude has the lowest level of sulfur in the world. WTI has sulfur level of 0.5%. Sweet crude has sulfur level of 0.15%. It's easier to refine, and it gives you more transportation fuels. So that's why it's a refiner's delight. So
economically, it's still sweet crude that should be preferred.
It's still sweet crude that should be preferred. Plus, logistically, it makes more sense for you to have home advantage, to have comparative advantage, for you to refine what you produce at home than for you to import crude oil from 7,000 kilometers across the Atlantic.
So when we hear that Dangote or any other domestic refiner is importing crude, we should know that that individual, not natural individual now is compelled to do that and is not doing it out of free will.
Is compelled to do it because you basically have a refinery that has to run. The Dangote refinery is alive, is running on a daily basis, and is producing petrol, diesel, jet, and the rest. And it must have feedstock to run. Look, globally you have 130 million barrels in installed capacity, 825 commercial and mostly modular refineries, 83 million barrels of throughput for active refining capacity on a daily basis. Dangote needs only 650,000 barrels per day. Nigeria is at 1.5 million barrels per day. NNPC, based on the cumulative average of what it gets, say they get anywhere around 770,000 barrels of crude oil per day. But it's a shame that you can't supply the domestic refiner with the crude oil feedstock that he needs, and yet Nigerians expect for you to have low PMS prices, because if you look at the quality grade of the PMS that is actually refined and supplied to the Nigerian market, which Nigerians are beginning to realize is actually better than what they've been consuming for the past 20 years, you see that on an international scene it's more expensive to purchase that PMS than Nigerians are purchasing it in Naira. So it just doesn't make sense that you're bringing the refiner to a situation where he's having to balance with importing crude oil, selling in Naira to the markets in Nigeria, and not having the advantage of the crude that is actually produced in Nigeria, because it's either pledged to repay back loans or it's pledged to OPEC for international off-takers. It just doesn't make any sense.
So in essence now, all that President Trump has said and his intention that he has expressed, we need to find a way to shield ourselves, as Nigeria now, to shield ourselves against some of those harsh times that may be coming.
Well, Trump will be looking for more off-takers internationally as America ramps up its crude production capacity. If they add 3, they will be at 16.3 million. That means they're adding another 17.9 billion standard cubic feet of natural gas, which means more LNG for them, basically. So lower crude oil prices is good for the refiner. It's also going to be good for...
It will be good for the
U.S. prices. It will be good for the U.S.,
and it will be good for consumers in Nigeria.
But it will be good for the U.S. only to an extent, and only to the extent that shale oil has a high unit production cost per barrel. They have a high break-even cost. Okay, so you having crude oil price drop below a level, it means that the producers are going to be running at a loss. So it's always going to have to create that balance.
I guess
not
OPEC,
below $60 per barrel.
OPEC will be there to create that balance.
OPEC will be there to create that balance, but it's a complicated situation. At the end of the day, we need to look at the domestic crude oil supply obligations, strengthen it, and ensure that we're moving from the strategy of pledging to debts and OPEC, international buyers, to satisfying the domestic obligations for crude oil processing in Nigeria. You export the difference of what you produce, of what is consumed in Nigeria. You get dollars as net export proceeds to the Central Bank of Nigeria, and you satisfy the FX needs of the country. That's the framework we have to adopt. The market has changed. We need to change. We're unfortunately stuck with the era where Nigeria was selling crude oil internationally and getting FX. And we're not realizing that we've transited to, actually refining crude oil into, secondary and tertiary derivatives. We've not moved.
I guess we could expect that by this year, this will be an opportunity for us to change, because as you said, Nigeria has over the years, decades, been known for exporting crude, not servicing or not needing to service domestic refiners. We do hope that will change.
Last year, numbers from Nigerian Shipping Council shows that last year Nigeria had 430,000 metric tons of throughput for imports, and it had 105,000 metric tons of throughput for exports. It means that 73.9% of all the vessels that came to Nigeria went back empty. Nigeria exports mostly raw materials.
Yeah.
That strategy has to change.
That's even beyond oil and gas.
Exactly. That strategy. And one of your
There's a law. I think I don't think it's been passed. I think it's the Senate. I was talking about you must add at least 10% value added to raw materials before it can be exported. I guess that's still
Raw Materials Research Development Council. Nigeria needs to transit from this strategy of exporting raw materials to beneficiating on the raw material. And a good place to look at, because it constitutes about 29 to 30% of your import volume before Dangote started, is oil and gas, especially crude oil. Nigeria needs to move from the era of exporting crude to actually refining crude and exporting the derivatives for FX proceeds back to the country.
All right, Kelvin Manuel, thank you so much for those thoughts and perspective. You know, all that we hear from the US these days, we have to be very careful and know where we're going to place our feet. But thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry